So I had a chance recently to talk to an old friend, Charles Bennet. When I was contracting back in Marin in California, Charles was one of those few insulation contractors who actually went beyond what was necessary in a lot of cases and what was beyond code, and just took a lot more time and care in the way he insulated homes. He learned about passive house and high performance homes about the same time I did. And it was very enlightening for both of us to figure out and to find out what we were doing wrong, and how we can get better at what we were doing. And Charles kind of took that on upon himself and really perfected the art of insulation in that area. He has since retired, but I caught up with him and had a nice chat with him. It was great to catch up and hear his thoughts about how we've excelled in insulation and sometimes have failed in what we do and how we build homes, and hopefully pass these words on to other contractors so that they understand the importance of these front end design issues that we have to deal with when we're designing and building high performance homes. And that's something we're all striving for. And it's so essential that we don't put some of these things on the back burner, like insulation and HVAC and et cetera, the air barrier, that they're actually designed right from the get-go with a team that's dedicated to performance rather than meet a deadline or make a certain profit. We have to get to a certain phase where we've figured out all the errors that we're doing, a way to get through them efficiently, and then move on and get the shell perfected, get the homes perfected, so we have good housing stock for future generations to enjoy. So here's my conversation with Charles. Have a listen. It's about an hour long, but it's a great catch up, great exchange of dialogue. So enjoy. Thanks. Keep asking everybody how it is on their end, and I get different results, but I guess it depends on where you're at. And
I don't know. It seems great. I mean, I guess with everything that's happened, it's taken leaps, of being able to call somebody from anywhere in the world and just.
I know, crazy, huh? Remember the days when we used to have to dial a phone and all that good stuff? It's like they don't believe us.
I still have a few of those.
Yeah, it sucks getting old, but at least we can talk about the old technology and compare it to today.
Yeah.
So whereabouts are you at? You're in Michigan, is that right?
I'm in Escanaba, Michigan, which is in the southern part of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan.
Whenever I hear Upper Peninsula, I already get cold and kind of shivers. And
not a few of my friends were really wondering if I had taken leave of my senses to come up here and spend the winter, but I hadn't been through a winter in 40 years, 50 years. So it was like, well, I always had fun in the wintertime. I mean, you can have fun. So
yeah,
anyway.
At least you had that in your childhood. I didn't have that. So when I kind of moved to a different area and experienced a winter, I mean, I know it was light compared to you guys up north, but it was kind of a shock to the system. But I enjoyed going to the snow and all that as a kid. So just kind of.
Well, I mean, there's lots of things you can do. I mean, particularly up here, everybody's really outdoorsy. So snowshoeing, skiing, snowmobiling, whatever. Right. They have some downhill skiing over towards the western part.
Yeah, I was going to ask. I guess there's resorts and stuff for people to take advantage of gravity and do some skiing.
And you remember Katie Holbacher, right?
She's up there now?
She grew up there.
Oh, wow, I didn't know.
Up here somewhere. I think over a little more towards the west. And she was actually, from what I heard, she was a ski racer. And competed in everything in like high school and stuff. So there's not so much here. It's really flat here, but you get over to the west of the, western part of the state.
And Andy Wall was from there too, right? Upper PI.
He wasn't from the Upper Peninsula. He was from the Lower Peninsula, down around Flint and Bay City and that kind of area, which he's here now. He's down there, moved out here, and I actually talked to him a little while ago.
Yeah, wish him well for me. I haven't talked to him in years. So, well, thank you so much for taking some time. I know this is kind of weird and stuff, but I'm just trying to document for our generation and future generations, kind of what we went through and what we've learned in our however many years in the biz, and based on your specific expertise, which for me was always insulation and how we deal with our walls and assemblies. So can we just go down that route for a few minutes and pick your brain? And
absolutely, whatever you want to talk about
cool.
is fine.
So several years ago, we were kind of learning about testing buildings and using blower doors and stuff to say, oh shoot, they're tight or not so tight or really loose. And on top of that, your profession brought in, well, you also have to have this thermal performance of an assembly of a wall or floor or ceiling, whatever you're dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
Did you know that when you first started, or did you just, I got educated as a builder of all these mistakes we were doing as builders and how we could do it better. Did you go through that same kind of kind of learning phase?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, the whole air sealing thing, the airflow through the building was a biggie for me. I mean, I always thought all that was a bunch of nonsense, you know. And maybe there was some, well, gee, a building needs to breathe, right? Well, it doesn't need to breathe, but it certainly needs to perspire.
That's an interesting line, yeah.
Kind of the other flip side of that, I mean, and that's the other revelation is when you change one thing, you change something else. I remember Steve were talking about, yeah, Steve were talking about when they started insulating walls that a lot of times 50, 60, 70 years ago, painters wouldn't paint your house if they knew you had insulation. And it was because the act of insulation changed the thermodynamics of the wall. And basically the siding, the backside of the siding and everything would get really, you'd still have this moisture moving through the building, you know, perspiring. When it hits the backside of the siding, wood usually, it's going to condense because it's so cold, and it basically ends up bubbling the paint. Then they learned about vapor barriers on the inside and how to manage that, you know. But you change one thing, other things change too. So
yeah, that was that whole kind of thing for me, is that house is a system, and it didn't really click until you kind of follow the investigation, say, well, that caused that, and that caused that, and that's connected to that, and you didn't do that right, and that's why you have all these problems. And we were looked at as like, you know, witchcraft. Is like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
So do you think our industry has grown since then, and maybe not embraced, but at least accepted that, yeah, stuff's going on? And because I know I'm in production building side now, and we test and look at their stuff, and they have to adhere to certain ACH and all that, but they're still not really they're not really connecting the dots as far as, yeah, I got to get this thing. This rater tells me I have to hit this number, and my walls have to be this R value, my ceilings have to be this, and you know, it changes when I go over the mountain range. I'm in a different climate, whatever. They understand the push of the code, but that's about it. And I don't mean to belittle them or critique them, but do you see that changing, or did you just didn't worry about that? Just did work with who you wanted to work with?
Well, particularly the last 10, 15 years, you know, I started getting involved with the whole passive house thing in the Bay Area. You were part of that. And it was kind of a revelation. I mean, that you could heat a house with a hairdryer. Whoa. And I think one of the reasons I got into insulation is I just kind of hate waste. I mean, spending money to heat a house and just have the heat just fly out of the building, man, that really bothered me a lot. And I got to the point that I could walk into a building and into a house, and they'd want me to insulate one thing or another, and I could pretty much tell that it wasn't going to do anything. And only later did I figure out, okay, and that's because there's all these other things hanging out, right? Insulate the floor, well, nothing. It didn't really make that much difference. It certainly didn't make that much difference in terms of the heat, um, saving any money on their PG&E bill. Maybe they were a little more comfortable, but if the windows are single pane and the walls are barely insulated, you got all that cold air flooding down. It's this big convection loop. It doesn't really matter whether the floor is insulated or not to some degree. It'll help, but not that much. So. Anyway.
Yeah, there was an interesting gentleman I heard, and I forget his name, and I'll try to make note of it. But at the latest Building Performance Conference, he was from one of the insulators or one of the labs. No, he was from a national lab. But he was explaining how insulation works, which I kind of knew before, but he really broke it down into, the convection loop in every stud bay. And, it's not just, the whole building, but you have all these micro convection loops. And that's what insulation is basically one of the goals of the product. Did you ever see that as an insulator that, and I guess it comes into play when we talk spray foam, but was there a danger of making a bridge instead of a barrier per se by using an insulative product? Can it be dangerous if we get too dense?
Yeah, I have heard that, and I don't have a problem with believing it, but the densities you would have to achieve to do that are pretty
right.
high.
I just was thinking about that today. Well, we're getting better at packing that cell, that stud bay, and I loved cellulose. You know that, and then you used every product under the sun. Did you have a preference, especially I guess on the passive house side, we were really trying to hit targets, and did that help with your infiltration, or were you just staying specific to the code but done really well?
Well, mostly I think what we're talking about here is walls. When you're talking about dense packing, occasionally you dense pack a ceiling, but not that often.
Right.
But walls are the weak point, really, for most houses. That's really where you're going to have. If you can make a big difference on the walls, you've really made everything else is relatively easy. I have seen, in fact, you can find insulation curves, density versus R value curves, charts, graphs, and up to about 3.5 pounds per cubic foot for cellulose. And beyond that, you get to 4, and it starts to come down, but it starts to come down really gradually. It's not like it just drops off a cliff. I don't know if I've seen the same thing I'm sure I must have with fiberglass, which also works pretty well, and actually at a much lower density. Fiberglass can actually do a better job of air sealing that wall. You'll get less air movement through it.
Oh, interesting. I always thought it was the cellulose that was the better retarder.
Yeah, me too.
And so you've learned that over the years that, yes, indeed, it was because we used that over that, or this product worked well.
This whole thing about building science is so fascinating. And once I started getting into it, I just love reading about it. And, Steve Brick and the Building Science Corporation, I think, is one of the most amazing gifts to the American, industry, anybody that can think of. But you start digging around and you find all kinds of stuff it's just fascinating. These charts and stuff, letters from Certainty that say that if you dense pack to something in an unvented ceiling cavity, a cathedral ceiling, that you don't need venting, or you don't need exterior insulation. In the Bay Area, for instance, in milder climates, even I know Building Science Corporation has been doing some research, and that's been going on for a while, about dense packing ceiling cavities with cellulose, particularly cellulose, and that it actually works out, much to their amazement.
The cellulose packing versus something else. Yeah, I remember they were always cutting up on a roof of a big gymnasium or something that was sweating and finding the...
Yeah, well, the conventional wisdom is you can't do that because it's going to get waterlogged up there over a period of a winter, and it's going to ruin your roof. Well, they did testing, and they dense packed it well, and then they went in there the next summer, and it was fine. And they're scratching their heads going, what the hell is this? What's going on here, But particularly with cellulose, and cellulose in this respect is a very interesting material. It's hydrophilic, which is, it has an affinity for water. So if you get condensation on the backside of the roof deck, or you get a roof leak, if you've got cellulose in there, it's actually wicking that moisture throughout into this entire mass of cellulose. And if it's a big mass, it can hold an enormous amount of water.
And were they ever concerned about, okay, it can handle the water load, let's call it, but the dry out, how would it get dry if it was an unvented pocket?
Summer comes along.
Just heats it up and
the roof heats up. I think it just pushes it right out to the interior. Maybe it comes up through the shingles somehow, some way. I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a little bit of heat or moisture that, transferred out of the building that way. But it just cooked it right out again.
So when you were doing the passive house stuff, would they switch from cellulose to fiberglass, or it just depended upon the team you were on at the time, or what was the product of choice?
Almost all cellulose. Yeah. Almost all cellulose.
Gotcha.
I don't remember ever doing any kind of a passive house, at least walls and ceiling, with anything other than cellulose.
Do you think they could have achieved their number had they gone fiber? I'm just curious. I'm not preferring one or the other.
Sure. Well, loose fill fiberglass, yes.
Interesting.
Fiberglass bats.
No. Right. I'm talking something that's blown in or behind a netting or a web.
Yeah. You do read about passive houses that use bats.
Really?
But I mean, the last five years or so that I was in business, I could count on the fingers of one hand the times that I used bats in a building. Because walls and ceilings, floors, it's not so critical under floors, but boy, I just didn't really do anything else except dense pack. And I kind of got known for that anyway, but I basically berated all the contractors that I worked with for so long that they finally gave up and said, okay, fine, do it the way you want to do it, which is music to my ears. And
that's why you became everybody's favorite, because it was like, finally we found one that doesn't believe what all the other guys believe.
The other part of that is their customers really liked it. I mean, I can remember a few of those that just were like, oh, the owner, months later, right? The owner just was like, oh, she really asked me to tell you that, wow, she really likes it. I mean, it's cool in the summer, it's warm in the winter, it feels solid, it's not all echoey, and boy, they really liked it.
Yeah, that was always the challenge of selling what we sold, right? If we could send them in time a year and say, here's what you're going to feel like if you let us do this X, Y, Z. And you could never sell that. They always wanted to see it in their own eyes, or touch it, feel it, smell it. So it was a really hard sell, selling the invisible. I mean, I'm glad some guys are doing it, but it was tricky. But you're right. I mean, as soon as you were in those environments, it's like, oh, night and day.
Well, which brings us around to the subject of contractors, general contractors.
Please.
Right? Which I actually have a general's license, but I never really used it. I have to be a little careful when I criticize them, because it's not like they don't have enough on their plate already. Just trying to bring a normal house project and make at least some money on it and have it come out. I mean, all the regulations and everything they've got to satisfy and everything. So, and then you've got this insulation contractor telling you that you have to do it this way, and it's like, I don't need it.
So right? they're thinking of you as kind of taking over their captain of the ship position or something, and fearing you're steering the project.
Well, I mean, I gave this talk, and I think I actually forwarded it to you, the PDF. And the first slide is a big picture of Rodney Dangerfield. And of course, Rodney Dangerfield's famous line was, "I can't get no respect," right? And that's exactly the way it is with insulation. It's an afterthought. It's something they have to do, but they could care less about. All I wanted, just satisfy the code. As long as the inspector's happy, I don't care. But I don't want to spend any more money than I absolutely have to. And he expects me to run in there, me and another guy with a pickup load full of bats, and put it in an hour, and he'll flip us each $100 plus the cost of materials.
Sad, I know.
That's basically, unfortunately, still the case. And Nathan's running into it, the new Mr. Insulation.
It's easy for us to do really good work when we work with really good teams and companies and people that want to do really good projects. But when you're outside of that arena, it gets challenging because, like you just said, it's so hard to show them the value of doing it right versus trying to correct an issue later on, which what we deal with is like we're always addressing the front end, helping with the stuff. But in addition to insulation, HVAC also takes a backseat, right? They're like, where are we going to run this duct? Well, you should have planned that when you were talking framing, right? Or some other, or layout or whatever. But you didn't. And now you want us to solve the issue and then you want it to work perfectly.
Well, that's another one of those don't get me started things, right? Which you probably know better than I do. Well, exactly. And it got to be, I'm an insulation contractor, but once I started taking all those PG&E courses, particularly in HVAC, which I really knew nothing about, and Andy Wall would give these presentations on air pressures in the house, and the way that both air sealing but also the HVAC system affect that. Wow. And I got to the point where I could, because I'm under the floor and in the attic, and I could see just amazingly bad duct systems, practically brand new. One huge house I did, and the main supply, they put a new furnace in, and the main supply was separated. And the guy was wondering why he didn't have any heat in the whole half of his house. And it wasn't until he wanted me to come in and insulate the floor, right? And here's this massive gap in the main supply that's leading into that section of the house. Wow. And then they pull the duct across a beam, a support beam, and kink the hell out of it. I'm an insulation contractor, and I know that's not right. Come on.
I know I definitely feel your pain, or hopefully you're enjoying your kick your feet up and put that behind you. But it's glad to hear the words because people need to hear them. But what I see, and I'm not trying to defend or support, but in the production buildings community stuff that I see, and it's all every state almost, it's getting better than it was. And I'm glad to say that because it was getting pretty bad and we finally kind of course corrected. So we are out there testing systems, probably not well enough, but at least it has to deliver flow. It has to have a certain, watts per CFM and all that good stuff. So it's ticking uphill, but it's a really slow on-ramp. And I don't know how to push that train any faster. I don't think it's going to move any faster because like you just said, they're only going to do what the code tells them to do. Unfortunately, there's a few builders that are kind of pushing that, and they're getting for a little higher HER score or a little higher lead score, whatever their program is.
For a little while, they're going to be able to get away with it. But the codes, particularly in California, which on the one hand, it's great that they're continually clamping down. On the other hand, I don't think it's kind of not so great because, how much regulation can you take if you can't spit in the street and without getting in trouble? It's kind of like, wow, this is getting almost onerous,
Yeah, well, yeah, I don't know if this is the right path you're going down, but I've heard, I talk to builders all the time. And they're like, we hate playing in California. And I love California. I'm a California boy. I'm born and raised, but I can understand their position because it's so onerous to build there. And and I don't know if that was your point or not, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that was one thing I noticed from my angle is, these builders build every state in the union, and then like going to California, is it worth it? Just because of that reason, which is unfortunate, but
the whole push to get them to do what they really should be doing, or at least that we think that they should be doing. But building houses that are much more energy efficient, which isn't that hard to do, right? It really isn't that hard to do. But one of the issues that I have with the whole passive house thing is, and I suppose it's because it's early days in some respects, is it's got to cost a lot less. I mean, they're trying to build pianos, and you've got to make it. They're using, you're using expensive materials and stuff that I just don't think it has to be that expensive to build a really good energy efficient house. The challenge for passive house is making it affordable. It's not how much you can spend on the damn thing, but how little you can spend on the damn thing.
I wish they would, if their destination is zero, make it zero extra cost or less cost. I totally agree with you. And I brought this up with Ann and Bronwyn. And
I don't see any reason why you can't do it. I really don't. It's just that there's a mindset, particularly when you get started on something like this, there's a certain mindset, particularly in California, practicality kind of goes flying out the window.
Right. I know. That's kind of why I kind of backed away from it. Is like these people are like spending tens of thousands of dollars above and beyond for this out of the country piece of equipment or this technology over here, or this tile or this faucet or this. It's like, why are you doing that? And it doesn't even make sense.
Right. Which is Chitwood, Rick Chitwood's famous, always was railing about LEED. And there was actually a lawsuit. They were suing LEED for, I don't know, almost like a RICO kind of thing. I don't know, something like that. But that LEED houses actually used more energy.
Interesting. Well, definitely more embodied energy, right? There's got more product in it. There's definitely more embodied energy in a LEED house than a regular house.
I guess, but it's just this fascination with shiny objects. The latest furnace that is 99.9% efficient. Well, screw that. You don't need a furnace in a house that's built right. You can heat the damn thing with a fart. Not that you want to, but
I know it almost got to like a, I don't want to say elitism, but this level of, I've achieved this award and you will never hit because I put all it, this kind of got tainted in my opinion. I'm sure it's a great system and I'm not trying to critique them, but yeah, that got kind of weird. I would like to see, like you just said, is like, let's create a house for the masses that outperforms all of that shit.
I suppose it had good intentions, but it went so far off the rails that as far as I'm concerned, I just think it's a joke. So, and I think a lot of other people think that too. But it's also, you gotta pay attention to it. All the building departments have all swallowed that particular Kool-Aid. So what are you gonna do,
It's such a delicate dance, but all you gotta do is build a better box.
Yeah, and that's why, from what I've heard, is that if you say, well, I'm going to build a passive house, some jurisdictions are actually recognizing that, oh, okay, here's your permit.
Oh, interesting. Well, why do you? Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, that's a good thing. Bypassing all this little stuff that you got to do with this and that. And and lead and everything. But if you tell them, well, I'm going to build a passive house, a certified passive house, they say, yeah, okay, because it's very well known. There's no doubt about what a passive house is, right?
And there's a level of verification and oversight, right? I mean, kind of, sort. I don't know what it is
more
today.
tested than any building you could build, and it's so well thought out, and it's the standards are so much higher than anything else that gets built these
days.
Right. Not just
are they concerned about the health and safety of a building official's inspection, or are they just saying, take it away, go for it?
I think that's part of it. I think a passive house is probably one of the safest buildings you could live in. Certainly one of the most comfortable from what I've heard. So anyway, we were talking about codes and what's pushing things forward.
Yeah. And I was amazed to hear you just say that you were kind of, even on the past, were you having these challenges on the passive house product, or just Joe Schmo, I need insulation and here's what I'm going to buy from you? I guess you had more luck working on the passive house projects, doing it your way and the way that you preferred to do it.
Well, there were very few. A lot of guys were building, Terry Norby, guys like that were building houses that were pretty close to passive house. They didn't certify them because they didn't want to have to go through all the rigmarole that entailed. But there is hope, and it's starting to become known in the literature. You've got Journal of Light Construction, which has almost every issue has something having to deal with high performance housing and energy efficiency. You have guys like Matt Reisinger, who on YouTube, who has this build show thing that he's been doing for about 10 years. And you can see this steady evolution where he's talking about how to insulate on the exterior of a building with rock wool, right? Comfort board and stuff. And he's actually, a lot of his projects are that. And he's visiting projects in all over the country, right, and making YouTube videos about it. So
they can't ignore us much longer. They're I've seen them too. Different places. And
it would be, it would be nice that it didn't have to be just the codes were pushing this. That people were also somehow getting interested in, oh, yeah, that sounds really great. I'd like a house like that. Can you build me one? That's now you're getting into the customer end of it, which is going to be a little tougher to do. But you talk to some of the contractors that have gotten involved with this and built something, and something happens to them. They really like it. Yeah, the contractors. I mean, they have all of a sudden drank that particular Kool-Aid, and they never go back. Yeah, they can't not see it. I think that's really important, and that's certainly been the way with a few of my contractors that I work for. And I'm pretty sure Nathan's having that experience too, probably a lot more than I am. I also see the other side of that, which is the same old nonsense.
Right.
Probably more of that than guys actually really wanting to do something different. Hopefully over a period of time that'll switch, but Nathan is tearing his hair out, and he's practically shaved bald, so that's a real feat, Guys that just, the builder really wants him to do it this particular way, but the general contractor could care less.
Right, he's got a schedule.
The general contractor knows what's in the plans and how it's supposed to be
done.
And
what the code requires,
Well, what's in the plans, not necessarily the code.
It doesn't say anything about do it right. It just says that should have that in it, right? Yeah.
Right. This is the way we're going to do it. This is the way the architect's drawn it. This is the way the owner wants it. And the general blows them off.
Do you think it then goes back to getting the right architect on the project?
Oh, absolutely. But how many times have you seen something drawn in the plans and then get on the job and he didn't do it? This happens all the time.
At least on the production side, when I walk into an executive meeting, we're talking about design, value, engineering, and all that bullshit. The architect is the quietest mouse in the room, and it's scary that they don't have any weight in the room. The builder is telling the architect instead of, you know what I'm saying? It's a weird dynamic to see, and unless that builder gets convinced that it's this different approach, whatever you're talking about is better, different, going to sell them more units, they're not interested.
Well, it means the owner is the one that's stuck in the middle. And ultimately, it's the owner that has to say, no,
I know.
We had an understanding that this is what you were going to do. I'm not going to give you my reasons because it doesn't matter. That's what I decided to do. And it was in the plans. The insulation contractor's been all over you about doing it, making sure that, you knew what was coming and everything. And you just didn't. You just damn well didn't do it. A couple of examples just recently. One of them, Nathan. Another one that Bob Bowles down in Pacific. I don't know if you know him, but architect. We insulated his own house, and he really got the bug, and called me up just a couple of weeks ago and said, "We got this house, and the guy's building it, and we specified this particular air seal for this, before as they were putting it together, they didn't do it. And they found out about it, and I guess maybe the owner's pissed, and Bowles is pissed, and now they're like calling me to go, what are we going to do? Is there any way we can fix it?" So Nathan's the guy that, has to deal with that. So
bummer.
It's going to keep happening. I mean, those stories drive me crazy, but geez, I mean, there's only so much you can do. You can't let it drive you, too crazy.
Yeah, I hope he hangs in there. And
I go out and have a nice long lunch and an espresso, and that usually helps a lot. So.
Good. Little pat on the back. So it's interesting. Can we circle back to I guess maybe it's happening more in California, but I'm seeing in other states too, of conditioned attics and what they're getting away with and not getting away with when they say it's conditioned attic. And they are moving, at least some builders, their insulation, their thermal boundary to the bottom of the roof deck. But they're still venting it. They're still venting that attic space with whatever kind of venting system you want to mention. But
even though they're conditioning the attic.
Even though and they call it a hybrid, right, at least in California. And it doesn't, I mean, from a building science perspective, it makes no sense to me. And I don't even understand, A, how did the builder get convinced that that was a good idea? And, B, how did the commission approve it? But it's just, I would just want to make sure I wasn't missing something that's better than the other version, which was whatever. So what if the equipment's in a 120-degree attic, as long as the ductwork gets down and delivered well and blah, 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 and have the thermal boundary at the attic plane instead of the roof deck. But yeah, I'm seeing, why do you have a vent there? I thought this was a closed out. Oh yeah, it's right here. It's in the code. Hybrid. It's like, what the hell is going on?
It's that clash between the old and the new.
I guess it's like compromise. It's like, yeah, but dude, you're like now 2 + 2 does 9.
And at a certain point, they're gonna get it, right?
Yeah. So frustrating. And now other states are going to follow suit because they can't sell the whole package, so they'll sell the half-ass package and call it good.
Yeah, well, I mean, there are in the code now, and it wasn't true up until about 10 years ago. You probably know more about this than I do. In the code now, they're very specific about how do you insulate an unvented rafter space, right? A cathedral ceiling, maybe, whatever you want to call it, to avoid condensation issues, right? That's the main thing, is the condensation that you have to worry about, the whole moisture issue. And they're very specific about it now. It's in all the codes. So there's no doubt about it. It's just that most building departments don't have any experience with it.
Is there thinking then perhaps, yeah, this is great new technology, but I'm still worried about the condensation issue. Therefore, I need to introduce ventilation somehow to get rid of that issue so I don't have to worry about it.
Well, it's about with any building department, that's a bureaucracy.
Yeah, true.
They have rules that they've got to follow, and they don't have a lot of wiggle room. They have to follow the rules, and to some degree, even though there may be something in the code about advanced framing, for instance, try and get an advanced framing project through a building department. It'll basically, their heads explode. Same thing with, putting insulation at the rafter line and having a conditioned attic.
Yeah, there's a few builders that they're going full bore that method, and they're running with it. Other builders too, they want to do spray foam, but then they're worried about what happens behind the spray foam at the roof deck.
With good reason.
Sure, but someone's got to okay, just pause, just design it well. It'll never hit dew point. Just put another outside layer, do something so they alleviate that issue, and then go forward.
Yeah, there's certainly things you can do, but it certainly is. It takes a little more thought to think out how you're going to do it, and it's probably definitely more expensive if you're going to insulate at the rafter line.
Right, I agree with you, and I don't know if you could talk to this, but Bronwyn brought it up that we were talking about if a little bit more time was devoted to the front end planning and design of things, you could spend less time building it. So the line of production it's the same distance, and I was saying, yeah, that's great, but convince them to stay in the conference room another week,
which is what Passive House is all
exactly.
about.
And I think that's the dynamic shift. It's not so much, it is too, but product and methodology, but also just how we build, what that process looks like, and how much time we devote to each phase of the process.
There's a young man that I know that building his first house, and he really early when he told me this, I said, well, if you want to really make this something really good, let's talk about it. Let's talk about it before you get all these plans drawn, right? I kept after him about it. I have to be a little bit careful because I'm sort of related to him. Didn't happen. Architect gets all the plans drawn, and I don't think the architect is a big firm in San Francisco. I don't think he'd ever build anything close to that. Completely unfamiliar with the whole principles, right? So here we are, plans are all drawn, and all of a sudden they're going, oh, how are we supposed to do this? And I basically tear them a new one, right?
Go back in time and do it right. Yeah, exactly. I know, it's so frustrating.
I go this, and then at the end I couldn't help it. I said, I've been wanting to have this conversation for like 6 months. Now we got to have it, which this should have happened 6 months ago. Now everything, it changes stuff. The architect's got to go back and redo a whole bunch of stuff, which is a waste of time. And
well, we just keep voicing our scratchy opinions, and hopefully someday somebody will listen and say, oh yeah, maybe that was a good idea.
Well, luckily Katie Holbacher was involved in it. And Katie's an engineer. Her shop is really involved in that stuff, and she carries some weight. Listening to some bozo insulation contractor that calls himself Mr. Insulation is not something that most architects are going to take very seriously, right?
Good for her.
So Katie knows. I mean, she's done all that stuff.
Yeah.
So,
well, we got to keep at it, and I don't know about you, but whenever I get a chance, I let my opinion loose. I don't give a shit anymore what people think. but
You
they got to
know,
know, and they're not going to hear it otherwise.
I've been thinking about building or buying a house up here. I probably will at some point, but looking at all these houses, which are pretty basic houses, and housing is relatively cheap, at least in certain places around here, and going, oh man, look at that! I could get that for it's only 40,000. Boy, that's perfect. I could pull the siding off, insulate, clean up the wiring, dense pack it, sheathe it, 6 inches of rock wool. No. Driving myself absolutely nuts, you know.
Well, it's either that or a hot rod in your garage, right? So you pick, and whatever makes you happy, dude.
Yeah,
But I
yeah.
think that's not a great, terrible idea, because you could even call the news and say, "Look what I'm doing." Get some press.
Well, if I did that, then I would probably be talking to the building department, going, "Hey guys, you want to see something interesting?" Yeah, there is a guy building passive houses in the northern tip of the Lower Peninsula, down around Alpena, and it's somebody that I actually talked to a long time ago. He had a post on the Passive House California site.
Is he building them to sell, or just what's he doing with them? Do you know?
I don't believe he's. I think he's acting as a contractor for people that want that kind of a house. So,
Because that would be an interesting, start as a small cottage builder, and this is just what I put out. This is my product. It just so happens that they're high performing houses, but down the street there's the production builder. You can go buy his crap, or you can buy my high performing house that won't cost you anything to heat and cool.
well, I mean, for me as a contractor, particularly the last 5 years or more, I said no a lot, and I really enjoyed that. I gotta say, they want you to come in there again, you know, pick up a load full of bats, run in there and knock it out in an hour and flip you $100, right? That kind of deal. And I would just say, I don't do that kind of work. Here's what I do. And occasionally one of them would say, okay, let's try it. I mean, the thing about insulation that I always heard was I would worry about my pricing. Oh my God, I'm charging more than bats, right? I'm charging more than a Costco contractor, right? And a lot of the guys would say, don't worry about it. Insulation is always the cheapest thing on the job anyway, which you'd probably know better than I would if that's true or not.
Well, it was definitely a small budget item, but I would adjust it up and down depending upon whatever the flavor of the project.
So if my dense pack would cost probably maybe 80%, maybe 100% of what bats would cost for some bozo just running in and throwing them in. Then I would worry about that. But at a certain point, I just said, I'm not worried about it anymore. I mean, go find somebody else.
Do you think you would have had that attitude had you been in a different spot and not had that activity of this other group of people that really appreciated good insulation?
That's a good question. I don't know.
That's a tough one. You can't coulda, woulda, shoulda, right?
It's a tough one. But I just go back to my experience of walking into some houses and just knowing I really wasn't going to be able to make much of a difference because there was just something else bigger going on with this house than this little me insulating the attic. And at that time, I didn't really know about, the whole impact of how the HVAC system is configured, particularly in Marin. An absolute epidemic of furnaces that were wildly too big. Not just a little bit too big, but I mean unbelievably too big. And the classic, what do they call it? When the furnace is too big, it comes on, it shuts off, it comes on, it shuts off. Cycling, yes. Yeah. Short cycling.
Yeah, and air conditioners when they need them, what, a week, maybe a few days. As you know, some locations in Marin, not all of them. We're talking Marin, California, Marin County. Um, but yeah, silly. But all that's climate based. But you were tuned into that because you were the guy that was putting the fur coat on the house that needed it or didn't need it, or how thick the fur coat needed to be, and they either listened to you or
Yeah.
not. And
Well, I mean, insulation and HVAC go hand in
yeah,
hand.
that whole yeah,
Um, it's a really more than almost anything else.
right.
And you know, just hearing Rick Chitwood and this guy Allison Bales, who has this blog and has a company that actually sizes and configures heating systems. Send him the plans. He sends it, so does it according to Manual J, Manual S, Manual D. You know, um, those guys in Nevada City, Grass Valley, Dan Peronko, his talk on how to optimize HVAC systems was amazing. Some of the things that he's talking about doing are, it's just like, wow,
Right. I mean,
I
he's
never
dialing it
knew.
in for sure. Him and Gavin are, you know,
Yeah.
for their population, for their climate zone, for their housing stock, they have it dialed in, and that's what every builder could do.
And I did some of that with, before I sold my house, I put in a new heating system. And I made sure I didn't, I actually got a 40/60, right? 40 being the lowest you could probably get for a whole house system. And I made sure, damn sure it was running only at 40. And I had the ducts. I said, I want big ducts. I want R8 insulation, and I want it to pass, you know, the 6%. Well, we hit 8%. But there were a couple of things that I made my own cold air return, which I was extremely proud of. But you know, we used the existing boots and stuff. So okay, 8% is pretty damn good. But you know, if a furnace is configured properly, it should run almost continuously on the coldest day of the year. That's what I've been told. It makes a lot of sense.
Me too. Same classroom we were sitting in. Yeah, I heard those stories too, and I totally agree. I get with my gal now and say,
You
hey,
know,
it needs to run all day. If it's running all day, that's a good thing. Don't
but
worry about it.
totally
I
counterintuitive
know
too.
that's what we do. Well, so is destination zero, right? It's like, why would you head towards zero? It doesn't
Yeah.
even make sense mentally.
I mean, you tell a customer that, and they're like, really? But once you explain why this running and running and cycling and cycling and running, you know, Rick Chitwood on that
Yeah,
house up
yeah.
north,
His was a
red,
duplex or triplex. Yeah,
yeah,
and bad insulation, perfectly sized system. He controlled all the fenestration. I mean, all of that
yep,
was
yep.
smart framing. So he was on 24 on center. So, but he dialed it in, and he got the perfect.
Well, the one that I heard about that he talked about a lot was and used in his presentations was one that he said he told the builder, look, you let me do the installation and configure the heating system and install it, and you can do everything else, and I will guarantee the heating bill. And apparently, he pulled it off.
Yeah, definitely. I
So,
mean, we're considering that now too. But I told the execs is like you cannot make that promise unless you do control the insulation, you do control the shell, you do control the window selection, you do control the mechanical design, and then
yeah.
maybe you can promise an energy bill guarantee. But until then,
What was it? It was some ridiculous amount per year, like
yeah,
$200 in
for his
an
bill, yeah,
really seriously Central Valley
right,
climate. You know,
right.
it
But he
gets
pulled it off, yeah,
110 in the
right.
summertime.
He probably locked the thermostat so they
So,
couldn't play with it, and but yeah, no,
wow.
I worship Rick. I would haul his equipment anywhere, anytime. I just loved hearing his stories and his words, and
Mhm.
I just
Yeah.
want to carry that torch along if I can. I hope you do too, and share your stuff sometimes and write it down and take pictures and let me know when you're doing something. I'll come up and shoot some pictures or something. I'd love to hear your stuff, and definitely if you start doing a house, that would be interesting to kind of the project we did in Marin. Remember the Point Reyes project where we lifted the house, or Terry lifted the house? But it was so fun to see you guys. Just every time I drove on that job site, you guys are almost giddy, and it was so fun to see. It's like, holy shit, these guys are having a good time working.
Yeah.
And it was just
that first Blue House was a real eye opener, I think, for everybody.
Doing the whole underbelly and getting the numbers we got to, and kudos to you guys. You did a great job.
That was definitely a fun project. So
on the new part, we didn't I remember talking with Bill and Graham. Didn't we decide that we just do the shell and then do the interior walls after insulation was put in the walls? Does that practice continue, and do you see value in that methodology?
I see value, but I think it's impractical.
Double dipping on labor time.
Well, yeah. Then you've got to somehow. You can't just frame the wall on the floor and tip it up, right?
Oh, you mean the interior wall like you did before?
The interior wall. Yeah. You can't really do that unless you were to frame it up, take the bottom plate off,
and slip it in after the fact.
Set the bottom plate.
It's interesting you say that, because I was seeing
tip the whole wall up because you've got to have that room to kind of
right. Yeah, I was don't mean to interrupt you, but I was in a new construction project in Nevada, I think we were, or somewhere, where it was a basement, where a lot of the houses are built with basements, and all the framing was held off the floor, and some nails stuck through, and like, what the fuck's going on? And like, well, they're going to pour, they're going to do something to tie it in. And so it was something unusual I hadn't seen, but maybe you've touched on something of a design workaround where you could do that, and it would be more practical. While the framer's there, he just frames up all the walls and stacks them in the corner. I don't know, but.
Well, I think there's ways of doing it without going to that extreme. Chitwood would talk about on the exterior walls, he would hold the interior walls back just enough to slip the drywall behind it. The attic, if you're going to have an attic, that's probably easier to take care of. So I don't think you really need to drywall the entire ceiling and then put the interior walls in. You've got issues with support and everything, right?
Especially if your boundaries on the roof deck versus the attic floor, right? Would that be your preference? Completely, if you had to go around the whole envelope, would you choose the roof deck or the attic plane? For your thermal boundary.
For the thermal boundary. Well, I think the main issue there is air sealing, right? Well,
and the holes, I guess, yeah.
If you're going to put the HVAC in the attic, that's the other problem, obviously, outside the envelope, which impacts whether the HVAC guy is a knucklehead or not, and does a shitty job of configuring and sealing up the ducts. But I think you can I don't think you have to go to the extreme of putting the thermal boundary at the rafter line and have a conditioned attic. You can, with just a little bit it doesn't take much to be able to figure out how to air seal the ceiling plane. At least take it into account.
Right.
Hey, what if you were to build the interior walls and then drape some Tyvek over the top of that wall and just leave it?
Right.
Then you put your ceiling joists in, you frame the whole thing up, you do whatever you're going to do, you drill your holes, whatever, you put some foam in there or however you want to do it. Terry's got his own way of doing that, and then it comes time to drywall the ceiling. You just flip the Tyvek out and bring the drywall up and have some kind of a seal there. And how hard was that?
I know we have to figure this out, because unless we can save them time and or money, or hopefully both, they're not going to change lanes.
Well, I think little tricks like that, building is all about little tricks.
Exactly.
And that's a little trick that is dead easy to do. Even just putting a sealer, do the airtight drywall approach, which Stebrick has talked about, you know, how hard is that? They even make that foam stuff, that little sealer in a can that you put a bead of it and it dries and it doesn't harden, and you can actually slap it and maybe even push it a little bit and it won't impact it. That's going to make a pretty damn good building, right? And it doesn't. How hard is that?
But it's like you said, it's in the plans. But the guy that has the can in his hand, drop the lid or whatever, and it gets kicked into the corner and all that good stuff.
Yep. Well, Stebrick and Chitwell both have railed about the attention to detail, the quality of work that gets done in the United States. I guess you have to be a little forgiving about it because people have to care about that. The owners have to care about it. The architects have to care about it, because doing it right, you're never going to do it right for the same amount of time as you're going to do it wrong. Because isn't that usually what it comes down to?
It might not bite you now and you might make a little profit, but the money you spend on the lawsuit and the complaints later,
you don't care, right?
Exactly.
All you want to do is get the drywall on and get it painted and get out of there.
They just want to sell it. Yep.
And if that's the only thing that the customer is seeing, and the building department is seeing, and the architect is seeing, who am I? It's too easy just to say, oh, that guy is nuts. We don't need to listen to him.
What are they chattering about over there? I know, it's so hard to, you touched on earlier, just kind of convincing, maybe it has to come from the buying market, the public. But even there, that's a hit and miss.
That's a harder sell, exactly. For sure. But really, it's the architects. And then it's holding the contractor's feet to the fire. Yeah, I think you really need to be fair with the contractor, though, and be extremely upfront about what you expect from him. If you have to go through and put a separate sheet in bold 24-point type that says, you will seal the bottom plates before you set the wall. You will seal the exterior sheathing with this tape. You will bring this house in under 1 air changes per hour at 50.
Interesting you say that, because you don't have those repercussions in the resident. But I remember in working in commercial, you would get fined $50 for every outlet you covered as a drywaller or whatever. They would put a price tag to it. And sure enough, hey, Kevin, send out the bill. What bill? Hey, he covered up 3 outlets today. Send him a bill. There was no, oops, sorry. No, you got a bill. You're going to pay for it. You're going to come out and fix it, and you're going to get a good bill. But I hear you, man.
I think you have to be fair to the contractor, the general. He's got a lot on his plate, but if it's super clear that this is what he's not building his father's Oldsmobile here, that this is something different and that he's agreed to it, right? If he says, I agree, and he doesn't do it, that's one thing.
And you're talking specifically about Mr. and Mrs. homeowner who are asking a contractor to build them a home versus the couple that walks down to the model community and buys a home from Mr. Builder. You're talking a more intimate relationship with a builder. If you want this box that you're about to go into to perform and you have these high expectations, like you just said, put it in writing, get signatures, get buy-in. And I would also add, bring in your team so they hear me say it too. Bring in your HVAC guy, bring in your insulator, bring in whoever you think needs to hear it, which is never going to happen, but at least you could say it.
Well, yeah. And I railed about that a few times, Why the hell didn't you talk to me about this? We could have done this so much better at virtually no extra cost. But now, remember that famous project in San Francisco you probably heard about?
Go ahead, fill us in. Tell us.
Big house, big company, really fancy architect. Passive house. They're going to make a passive house. That's what they want. Certified passive house. So they get it all. They get it all done. I think they got it all done, and they brought in a guy to pressure test it to get their air loss number. Didn't pass, not even close.
They didn't do any testing, air infiltration testing along the way. They just came in for the final. Oh boy, not good.
So this is a multi-million-dollar project,
Yeah, right.
So all of a sudden they're frantic. They're calling Terry, they're calling Andy, and they go in and look at it, and Terry's saying, well, I can do some things, but really, you're screwed. You screwed the pooch, basically, as the old expression goes. I don't know what they were thinking, but they weren't thinking.
Yeah, it's almost like the owners of these certified passive house products have to go through their own certification process just to make sure that they're aware of the challenges of what they're about to embark on.
Yeah, and it is a challenge.
Exactly, it's not easy. It will get better and easier as we go, but right now it's...
If you've got somebody that's done it,
right. Yeah, that's...
all of a sudden it's not that difficult.
Right.
You're taking the steps, you're doing it in order that needs to be done.
Right. And you mentioned it, like creating the team. If that is indeed your target as a home builder, you're going to hire somebody, and you have these high expectations. Hire the guy who's done it before, or the gal, and that team. They have a track record. Don't hire Joe Schmo who says, "Oh yeah, I can do. How do you spell passive? Yeah, I could do that, no problem." Yeah, it's crazy.
Or they think it's a passive solar.
I know. That's what I'm saying. It's like it's way over their head.
Yeah. Well, as you say, I mean, to some degree, it's still early days, and it'll eventually...
It's peeking in a few doorways. I've seen it pop up here and there as an option or an alternative route. So and like you just said, that'd be cool on that permit thing. If, hey, you're building passive, here you go, front of the line or whatever.
Yeah,
we'll see.
Yeah,
well,
slowly.
I hope so. I hope we'll see something before we depart. We've done our damage. All we can do now is reflect.
The real challenge is the whole remodel market. I mean, obviously, we've got all these houses that are what they are, and that incredibly inefficient. And what are you going to do about that? That's where the real challenge is. At least as we're going to make any real dent in bringing down that 40% of energy spent in the United States is on heating and cooling houses, right?
And crappy houses, right?
I wouldn't say crappy, but just they didn't know. Back then they didn't. That wasn't really. You put a big furnace in, and
Yeah, I remember handing my dad nails as he built houses, and there was no insulation in walls as when we were building houses as kids. That's just how you built.
I moved to Marin, and one of the reasons I got into insulation is when I did get into insulation, it was like, holy moly.
There isn't any here.
There's no insulation. They built these houses without insulation.
What's insulation?
In fact, there was even an advertisement on YouTube or something. I think I found it. And they were extolling these new houses for sale in the 50s. And in California's mild climate, you don't even need insulation. That was the pitch. They put a big furnace in, gas. I mean, my first car, I think I got it in like 1970, 1969. Gasoline was 19 cents a gallon. Gas wars. What was natural gas? Did they even bother to charge for it, right?
Yeah.
Put a big furnace in, and who cares? So, but here we are. So
I know. Times are a-changing. Hopefully building will too. It's a slow boat to turn around or course correct, but can't give up.
I'm happy to hear that you're trying to do something about it. So.
Well, thank you. I'm trying. I mean, on both planes, both in my professional and kind of my free time, is trying to still push and pull and nudge and, get people to do the right thing, or at least think about it. So yeah, it's fun.
Well, once once it gets under your skin, this whole high performance building bug and building science bug, it doesn't let go.
Right.
It continues.
Right.
So,
which is, it's one of those passions you can't kind of let go. Right. It's like good tasting Kool-Aid.
Yeah, I would love to do a building up here, and see if there's any interest up here. So,
well,
I know there's going to be a lot of. I'm not doing that.
Right, they're not going to touch it, or you're going to get a weird group of people that say, "Yeah, we'll try it." But that's cool, man. You got to start somewhere. Start the movement.
Well, if there was ever a place that would interest people, it would be up here.
Right, I mean, the Great North,
Upper Peninsula gets a lot colder than the Lower Peninsula.
I know we didn't get into it, but I'm sure your perception of quality of a build in that neighborhood, that region of the country, is a little bit different than San Francisco as far as thermal comfort.
This is a very old town. Escanaba was a big part of the iron ore industry. Mining. Upper Peninsula is known for its iron and copper mining. Enormous amount of iron ore, mountains and mountains of iron ore came out of here and Marquette and up towards Hancock and Houghton. Also timber, a lot of timber came out of here. This is a huge shipping port, and all these buildings around here are like late 1800s. So there's a lot of really old buildings, and I think most of those buildings are so well built they'll never fall down unless somebody does something stupid. Which is why a lot of the buildings in San Francisco probably will stand forever, because, well, they're not insulated, but there's so much air movement going through those walls.
I know. It was so fun to find perfectly nice redwood that was 100 years old, that's just well preserved in these non-insulated walls.
Well, yeah. The walls are uninsulated, and I would get called out to insulate the walls. Well, the first thing I would look at, is there any tar paper behind the siding? And usually the answer was no. They were never built with tar paper, or the tar paper was so old it had disintegrated. The question to me would be then, am I going to insulate those walls? And the answer was usually no, because if there's no water resistant barrier, which is not the siding, it's the tar paper under the siding, you're going to have a huge mess. So I would just basically say, you know what, I can't do it. There's no way to do it. I've had people open the walls up. Yeah, and they would put Tyvek or something and I think Reisinger has a video on this where they put spacers, like a 3/4 inch spacers, and then they put like 1 inch foam, and they would put it up against they have a little ventilation cavity, and they had somehow vented at the top and the bottom, and then they would pack the rest of the cavity with insulation. And that's the only way they could figure. But that's a lot of fussing around. So
it's like, where do you stop and start? Yeah, some of those row houses in San Francisco is just easy. You only got so much exposure to the elements anyway. It's like, wasn't worth the effort.
Yeah. Well, it is what it is. I mean, beautiful houses, but hard to do anything with. So.
Well, thanks, Charles. I really appreciate your time and talking shop with me.
Great pleasure to hear from you, and good luck with your project here. So.
All right. Thanks, buddy. Take care, huh? And keep in touch, and tell Andy I said hello, and thanks, Charles. See ya. All right. Bye.
Thanks.